The oak doors of Courtroom 3B creaked open, and in walked the man everyone had been waiting for. Richard Kane, billionaire, steel magnate, the man who had built a global empire out of nothing, or so he liked to remind the world. His name was plastered across the business magazines, his face familiar in newspapers, and his arrogance legendary in every boardroom he stepped into. But today, his stage wasn't a glossy front page. It was a courtroom, and instead of the applause of investors, he was met with whispers, gasps, and the low hum of scandalous curiosity. Richard walked tall, chin lifted, as though the entire proceeding were beneath him. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor like a metronome of confidence. Draped on his arm was Sophia, his mistress, half his age, strikingly beautiful, wearing a scarlet dress that seemed to mock the solemnity of the courtroom. She smiled, too, but hers was nervous, fleeting, like someone who wanted to look powerful, but knew deep down she was standing on borrowed ground. Across the room, at the plaintiff's table, sat Elena Kane. She was everything Sophia was not. Where Sophia was flashy, Elena was dignified. Where Sophia clung, Elena sat alone, shoulders straight, hands clasped in front of her. Her beauty was not loud, but it was enduring, the kind of grace that didn't fade with age. Yet her face carried exhaustion, years of sacrifice etched into every line around her eyes. For 15 years, she had been Richard's wife, his anchor, his shadow, the mother of his son, and now she was the woman he thought he could discard. Richard's lips curved into a smirk the moment he saw her. He leaned toward Sophia and whispered something that made her laugh softly, the sound cruel in the tense silence of the chamber. Elena didn't react. She had learned, long ago, that giving Richard the satisfaction of her emotions only fueled his arrogance. But her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. She wasn't here just to fight for dignity. She was here for truth. The judge entered. Justice Howell, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, commanded immediate silence as he struck his gavel. Court is now in session. The murmurs died instantly. The weight of the moment pressed on everyone in the room. Richard sprawled comfortably in, his chair tugging lightly at his cufflinks, as if this were nothing more than a meeting he had already won. Why wouldn't he think so? The prenuptial agreement was airtight. Elena would get little to nothing. He would keep the empire. He would walk out free, rich, and smug, with Sophia on his arm. But Elena's attorney had filed for custody proceedings regarding their 12-year-old son, Daniel. That was the curveball Richard hadn't cared about. He assumed the boy would stay with him. After all, money bought everything, or so he believed. Justice Howell shuffled through some papers, then paused. His gaze moved from Richard's smug face to Elena's quiet strength. "This court has received new evidence," he said. His tone was grave, deliberate, every word echoing like a hammer on steel. Evidence that has the potential to change the course of these proceedings entirely. Richard leaned forward, amused. "And what evidence would that be, Your Honor?" The judge lifted a sealed envelope. Thick, official. The red wax stamp on the front gleamed under the courtroom lights. Inside it lay truth. "DNA results," the judge declared. The room gasped. Even the journalists used to courtroom theatrics were stunned. Pens scratched frantically across notepads. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Elena's eyes widened, but her lips pressed firmly together. She knew. She had been waiting for this. Richard froze. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. His smirk faltered. His eyes darted to Elena, then to Sophia. The mistress's grip on his arm loosened. Her painted smile trembled. The billionaire tried to recover, chuckling as though this was a minor inconvenience. "Your Honor, surely this is unnecessary. My son is—" Justice Howell cut him off. These results concern not just custody, but legitimacy. And Mr. Kane, perhaps your confidence today was premature. The words sliced through the room. Elena closed her eyes briefly, breathing in deeply. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest flicker of power shift. The years of betrayal, humiliation, and silence were about to be vindicated. Richard adjusted his tie, his composure cracking. For the first time, he wasn't controlling the narrative, and yet he forced another smile, leaning back in his chair. DNA results or not, Your Honor, nothing changes the prenuptial agreement. My wealth, my businesses, they remain mine. But Justice Howell's gaze sharpened. We'll see, Mr. Kane, because sometimes truth is worth more than fortune, and this court will not be deceived. The envelope lay on the judge's desk, heavy with secrets. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on it, as if it contained a ticking bomb. Richard Kane's empire wasn't crumbling yet, but for the first time, the cracks were visible, and those cracks were about to widen. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Richard Kane leaned back in his chair, forcing his lips into the same smug grin he had walked in with. But the cracks were there. His jaw tightened, his hand twitched, and sweat threatened to break across his forehead. For a man who prided himself on control, losing it, even for a second, was dangerous. The judge tapped the envelope on the bench. Before we move forward, this court will allow the plaintiff to address why these DNA results are relevant. Elena's attorney, Margaret Vance, stood. A sharp, confident woman in her 50s, Margaret had a reputation for being ruthless with liars. She turned toward the jury, her voice steady. For 15 years, Elena Kane stood by her husband. She raised their son, Daniel, largely alone while Richard built his empire. She believed in his promises. She sacrificed her dreams for his success. And now, he seeks to discard her for someone else. But what Mr. Kane forgets is that truth always finds its way out. These DNA results will determine more than property. They will determine blood. The room buzzed. Cameras clicked furiously. Richard let out a low laugh. This is absurd. My son is mine. Everyone knows it. Elena's voice finally broke the silence. Quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the air. Do you, Richard? Do you really know? The words hit harder than any gavel strike. For a moment, Richard faltered. His mistress, Sophia, turned her head sharply toward him, eyes narrowing, with suspicion. The judge opened the envelope slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the suspense. He scanned the papers, his face a mask of neutrality. Then he looked up. These results confirm that Daniel Kane is indeed your biological son, Mr. Kane. A wave of murmurs rushed through the courtroom. Elena closed her eyes, relief washing over her face. Her son's legitimacy was beyond doubt. Richard exhaled, his grin flashing back instantly. Exactly as I said, Your Honor. This has been a waste of time. But then Justice Howell's voice deepened. However, this envelope contained more than one test. The room stilled again. Elena's head snapped up. Even she hadn't expected that. Richard's smirk faltered. What? What do you mean? The judge's eyes locked onto Sophia, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. A second test was submitted. A DNA test between yourself, Mr. Kane, and Ms. Sophia Delgado. The mistress's face went pale. Richard's fists clenched on the table. That's impossible. That's irrelevant to these proceedings. But it was too late. The judge's voice boomed. The results show a 99.9% probability that Ms. Delgado's infant daughter is yours, Mr. Kane. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, and camera flashes filled the air. Sophia covered her mouth, trembling. Richard's face drained of color. The man who walked in untouchable now sat trapped in the very scandal he thought he controlled. Elena's chest tightened. But her eyes burned with vindication. It wasn't joy. This truth hurt, but it was power. The judge slammed the gavel. "Order! Order in this court!" The chaos settled, but whispers still lingered. Richard shifted forward, voice low but venomous. "You had no right to drag this into the light." Justice Howell leaned forward, unflinching. "The law has every right when perjury and deception are involved. You flaunted your mistress in this courtroom. Now the truth about her and your actions is part of this record." Sophia buried her face in her hands. She hadn't wanted it revealed like this, not publicly, not brutally. Richard stared at her with rage and betrayal, but she couldn't meet his eyes. For the first time, Richard Kane's smile was gone completely, and, "Elena?" She sat straighter, her hands steady, her voice soft but resolute. "You thought you could humiliate me, Richard, but the truth has humiliated you instead." The courtroom had become a storm. Every whisper carried venom. Every flash of a camera struck like lightning. But at the center of it all, Richard Kane sat in silence. The billionaire who had walked in smiling was now a man cornered. His mistress, weeping, his wife unbroken, and the law closing in around him. Justice Howell struck the gavel again. "This court will proceed to judgment. Both the plaintiff and the defendant have been heard. Evidence has been presented. The truth is clear." Elena's attorney stood tall, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, my client does not seek to ruin Mr. Kane. She seeks fairness. After 15 years of loyalty, after raising their son while he indulged himself, after enduring betrayal, she asks for justice. The prenuptial agreement may have sought to silence her, but this court has now seen deception beyond marriage. Vows, assets were hidden. Children were hidden. The agreement is tainted by fraud." Richard shot up from his chair, his voice booming. "Fraud? Fraud? I built this empire with my own hands. She deserves nothing, nothing." Elena turned slowly to face him. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his rage like glass. "And yet, Richard, without me, you'd have destroyed yourself years ago. I stayed when no one else would. I believed in you when the world laughed, and still, you betrayed me, not once, not twice, but every time you thought no one was watching. Now everyone is watching." The words silenced him. Even Sophia, her mascara streaked from tears, dared not speak. The judge leaned forward. "This court has weighed the evidence. It is the ruling of this court that the prenuptial agreement signed between Mr. and Mrs. Kane is hereby void on the grounds of fraudulent concealment and perjury." The room erupted. Richard's face went crimson. "You can't do this. This is my money, my empire!" The judge's gavel slammed. "Silence, Mr. Kane. This court will not be mocked," Justice Howell continued. "Mrs. Elena Kane is hereby awarded 50% of marital assets, full custody of Daniel Kane, and spousal support. Additionally, the court acknowledges the existence of Mr. Kane's illegitimate child with Ms. Delgado, which shall be addressed in separate proceedings." Elena's breath trembled, but it was not from weakness. For the first time in years, she felt free. Richard collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. The empire he thought untouchable was split in half. The power he wielded so proudly had slipped through his fingers. Elena rose slowly, her heels clicking against the courtroom floor. All eyes followed her, not as the betrayed wife, but as the woman who had endured humiliation and walked out with dignity. She looked once at Richard. No anger, no tears, just quiet strength. "And," she whispered so only he could hear, "you smiled when you walked in, Richard." "I'm the one smiling now." As she walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashed wildly. To the world, she was no longer just Richard Kane's wife. She was the woman who had stood against betrayal, lies, and arrogance, and won. The billionaire. Husband had entered with a mistress and a smile. He left with nothing but shame.